Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving weekend, and we're back on Monday here, focusing on a variety of different topics over the next 2 hours. Matter of fact, if you don't like one topic, just stay tuned. We'll be talking about quite a few today. We'll be starting out with our good friend Dinesh D'Souza, and I'll get more into that in just a minute. But a little bit later, in the second hour, we'll be talking about some of these health-sharing ministries. We'll also be talking with James Rosen from Fox News about Cheney One. Of course, we have had the climate change conference begin in Paris, and of course, a shooting at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado. So quite a number of things to cover. Much of that will be in the second hour, because we want to devote the first hour to Dinesh D'Souza, his new book, Stealing America, What My Experience with Criminal Gangs Taught Me About Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. Certainly no stranger to Point of View. We've had him on to talk about some of his earlier films and books like America and 2016 Obama's America, as well as books like Life After Death, The Evidence, What's So Great About Christianity, going all the way back to the 1990s. First book I think we ever interviewed him on Point of View on was Illiberal Education. And Dinesh D'Souza, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, it's always a pleasure. Good to be on the show. Well,
it's always great to have you here. And I want to, first of all, of course, spend just a few minutes talking about your incarceration. But then I want our listeners to recognize that you, they wanted to teach you a lesson. But as you've said on other interviews, they taught you a lesson, but it wasn't the one they were looking for. Because out of this, you've identified a number of different scams that have been used by groups, including political parties, as well as maybe a little more tutoring on things like Saul Alinsky. So the book is a lot more than just having to go to jail, but let's, if we can, explain that. And even trying to explain that to some of your fellow inmates, they couldn't believe it. I mean, really? You got sent to jail for spending more money on a political campaign, a U.S. Senate campaign? Come on, you had to have killed somebody. Or come on, you must have been, I think one of them called you a doctor because you thought, well, since you're in, you must be a doctor. You must have had a Medicare scam. But tell the story for listeners that aren't familiar with it.
Well, one thing I learned in this confinement center, this prison facility run by the Bureau of Prisons under the Obama administration, it had about 120 convicts, not white-collar guys, by the way. There were a few of those, but the majority were drug smugglers, coyotes, armed robbers, the whole gamut of criminals. And one thing I learned very quickly is that crime is fundamentally about stealing. It's about taking stuff that isn't yours. It's about figuring a shortcut to benefit yourself, typically at somebody else's expense. Now, my crime was the exact opposite. I gave $20,000 of my money to Wendy Long over the campaign finance limit. I convinced two of my friends to give. I reimbursed them. So I used straw donors, as they say. And I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. But when I tried to explain this to the criminals, they just laughed and laughed. They thought I was taking money from somewhere. When they found out I was giving money, it just baffled them. They came to the conclusion, and I have to agree with them, that I'm one of the stupider criminals in the history of American jurisprudence. I'm also stupid, I believe, because I should have known that there would be a big target on my back.
Yes.
This was in 2012. I released a big movie about Obama. I went to Hawaii and Indonesia and Kenya. I met his grandmother. I was at his family homestead. I interviewed his brother in the Huruma slum of Nairobi. I kind of got not only into his ideas, but into his head. And he denounced me, Obama did, on his website, barackobama.com. So I should have known that they would unleash the federal dogs on me. And so for this reason, too, I should have realized, look, the smallest thing they're going to get you for, and they did.
Well, and again, Judge Berman is the one that actually issued all of this. Do you think he was connected to President Obama, or did he just want to maybe send a message to anybody else? Because again, what the crime, we acknowledge the crime. Everybody on the table, around the table, now acknowledges the crime, if you want to call it such a great crime. But the punishment far exceeded it. And what about that?
That's the issue. I mean, yeah, you can break the law, but let's say, if you're speeding on the highway and they give you 5 years in prison, then the sentence doesn't fit the crime. So penalties need to be proportionate to offenses, and there has to be a certain parity. If other guys do the same thing, they should get the same offense,
right,
the same penalty,
yeah.
Right? So there's no one in the history of American jurisprudence, no one who has done what I did without a corrupt motive. And gotten what I got. Now, a more typical case is there was a fellow named Chutwal about the same time as my case was making its way. Now, this is a Democratic donor. He gave straw donations $180,000 to a whole bunch of Democratic candidates, including Hillary Clinton. Now, he was guilty of corruption. He was convicted of witness tampering, trying to convince witnesses to lie under oath. No prison, no confinement. He got away with a fine and some community service. So this is the point, that this progressive justice I now see is a real oxymoron. It's a fraud because it's not dispensed equitably for people who do the same thing.
We'll open up the phones later. People want to pursue that, but I want to move on to the content of your book. And that is, you talk about, for example, a heist to end all heist. In some respects, politicians may look at some of the criminals and say, you got put away for a really small crime. I mean, if you're going to really steal something, how about stealing a country? How about stealing the financial resources of a country? And you found that as you ended up spending time, not by choice, but by requirement, with individuals who are sort of looking at the world through a gangland kind of mentality, you saw a remarkable similarity to what actually seems to be taking place in our country.
Well, I went in with the Shawshank Redemption idea that these criminals purport to be innocent, they purport not to have done what they did, and I found out that that's not their view. They admit that they did it, but their point is they say we are the small fry. We're not the big criminals because the big criminals are out there. We are actually the stupid criminals because we got caught. But the big criminals never get caught, and in fact, the system never even goes after them because they control the system. Now, when I heard this, I was reminded actually of a story in Augustine's City of God. It involves Alexander the Great and the pirate. Apparently, the Emperor Alexander heard about this pirate who was out in the sea raiding ships. So he calls the fellow in and he goes, "Where do you get this crazy idea, raiding ships and taking people's stuff?" And the pirate goes, I got it from you. The pirate says, "Look, I'm a small-time guy. I got one ship, and that's why you call me a pirate. You've got a whole navy and a whole army, and you conquer all kinds of territory that doesn't belong to you. But because you do it on a big scale, you're a kingdom, and I'm just a pirate." So this helped me to see the connection between, in a sense, robbery on the largest scale possible. And the reason I call my book Stealing America is that what I believe is going on today is the progressives are stealing the largest pile of wealth ever accumulated in one place, and that is not Fort Knox, and it is the wealth of the United States of America. America is the most valuable product the world has ever produced,
wow.
And that is what the thieves are after.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that theft at a very significant level, a heist to end all heists. We'll talk a little bit about creating new wealth in America, and then some of the scams, the greed and inequality scam, or the reparations scam, the Society Did It scam, the Lucky Luciano scam, some of the others. Fascinating reading, and it's all in this book, Stealing America, published by Broadside Books, which is imprint of HarperCollins, and you can find it, no doubt, in your local bookstore. But, of course, we have a link to Dinesh D'Souza on our website, as well as a link to the book if you'd like to order it right away. And, again, he joins us for the hour, and if you'd like to join us a little bit later, we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to join the conversation. Stealing America, what my experience with criminal gangs taught me about Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, I know that many Americans suffer from addictions, but I've never really run the numbers, and so was shocked when I read the book by David Kupelian, The Snapping of the American Mind. In the midst of his discussion of social problems in America are some sobering chapters about our addictions. Nearly 25 million Americans are currently illicit drug users. Marijuana is the most commonly used drug, but cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other drugs are also part of that statistic. Add to that alcohol consumption and the estimate that nearly 1/4 of all Americans participated in binge drinking. And according to the Department of Health and Human Services, in an average year, 30 million Americans drive drunk and 10 million drive impaired by illicit drugs. That means that well over 80 million Americans are intoxicated in one way or another with illegal drugs or alcohol, and 40 million of them have been at one time or another driving under the influence. But there's a parallel drug problem. This is the rapidly increasing number of people taking medically prescribed but poorly understood and mind-altering psychiatric drugs. These include such things as opiate analgesics to suppress pain, as well as various mood-altering drugs. David Kupelian says when you add all these numbers, you can easily estimate that at least 130 million Americans are taking some drug, legal, illegal, alcohol. In a nation of 320 million, 130 million using some sort of drug is astonishing. Then he begins to document all sorts of other addictions, like addictions to sex, pornography, gambling, and even our digital devices. It doesn't take long before you realize that we are a nation of addicts. We have an addiction problem that pastors and churches need to confront. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza as we talk about his book, Stealing America. It just came out, and you certainly can find it in your local bookstore, but we have information about it on our website as well, pointofview.net. Dinesh, you were talking about, of course, stealing wealth in America, and you make a comparison. Since you are originally from India and were born in Mumbai, you talk about the corruption in India, and we're not just picking out India. We can you mentioned Thailand, Mexico, South America, things like that. Oftentimes the cops are corrupt, the politicians are corrupt. That's very typical, and sadly a reality of why sometimes the economies don't work there, because there's no sense of private property, due process, and all of the rest. But your argument is, in some respects, America and India, even though they're very different, there are some similarities. How so?
Well, there are increasing similarities now. It used to be that America was quite different and was started as a sort of refuge for people who didn't want to operate that way. I came to America in part because I grew tired of growing up in a country where corruption is a way of life, where politicians, for example, go into public office to get rich, to make money. Now, if you look at America, Republicans and Democrats, no one would say that Truman or FDR or Kennedy or Reagan or Bush or Carter, for that matter, went into the presidency to get rich. That was just not their motive, whatever you thought about their politics. Now, some presidents were rich before, like FDR and the Kennedys, but they didn't go into politics to make money. Now, contrast this, for example, people scorned Hillary Clinton when she said, we were dead broke. But it is true that the Clintons didn't have any money when they went into politics. Now they've accumulated several $100 million, and their foundation has over $1 billion. So how do you go from zero to a couple of $100 million at warp speed.
Yes.
Well, one way you do it is you invent the iPhone or you start a successful business, but they didn't do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
They figured out a way to make politics pay for them. And this is part of the progressive heist that I've been very blind to for most of my career. I've tended to look at American politics just as a debate of ideas, liberty versus equality, and so on. But now, having been in this sort of, you may say, dungeon, and beginning to see the way that these criminals operate, their various ruses and scams, I begin to see that politics has a powerful element of that, and we shouldn't miss that.
Well, and again, you can recognize, and we've done this on this program before, show, for example, how many of these individuals in politics have done very well in the stock market, much better than hedge fund managers or anything else. And, of course, they had inside information. Of course, if they did it outside of politics, they would be prosecuted for insider trading. And so whether you look at Republican speakers of the House or Democratic speakers of the House, whether you look at the Senate majority leader, the Senate minority leader, you see how many of them have benefited from that. But then there are some that have made it into quite a system. And, of course, as you pointed out, the Clinton Family Foundation, oh, my goodness. I mean, the people are not giving to the foundation because they believe that it's going to do, say, the good works of the Gates Foundation. They do it because they want to have access to influence. True?
Yeah. Look, presidents have made money from speaking before. Typically, a president commands about $100,000 to give a speech. And Gerald Ford did that, and Reagan did that. But with Bill Clinton, it's a little different. Bill Clinton will go someplace, and often it's a trouble spot in the world. He'll go to a place, he'll go to the Cameroon, or he'll go to a mineral-rich country in Africa, or oil in Libya, or even Haiti, places where you sometimes don't even think there's money to be made. And somebody will pay him $500,000 or $750,000 to speak for 15 minutes. Now, you might think this is absolutely nuts, but it turns out that is not really a speech payment, it's a down payment.
Mm.
Those people want something. And Hillary Clinton is now Secretary of State. So Hillary Clinton then approves a deal that brings hundreds of millions of dollars to this guy. And then, as a payoff, millions of dollars flow to the Clinton Foundation. Now, Hillary, this has been laid out time and time again, and Hillary's only defense is, look, you can't actually prove that there is a causal relationship between step A, Bill collecting the down payment, B, step B, me taking favorable action, and C, the millions of dollars flowing into my pockets and the pockets of the foundation. But you mentioned insider trading. In insider trading, that's about all you need for a conviction.
Right. But again, the quid pro quo, as they say, is not there. But, of course, even Bernie Sanders has raised this issue in the Democratic debates with Hillary Clinton. But again, a lot of it depends, I would have to say, Dinesh, on the American people. Are they going to continue to allow this, or are they going to say, enough is enough? People should be going into public service because they see it as public service, not a way for individuals to get rich quick.
See, I think in a way what's happened here is that the progressives have pulled this off by appealing to the base instincts that people do have. We all have in us a little bit of the angels and a little bit of the bad side as well. And so what's happened, take Obamacare. Obama goes to the American people and he goes, listen, you got these fat cat insurance companies and they've got a lot of money. And so let's go rip them off. Let's go make them do stuff they would never ordinarily do. Let's make them even insure you for stuff that you had before you thought of buying insurance. So, there are lots of Americans who go, yeah, Obama, go get them. You can be our guy and bring them to heel. So Obama now goes to the insurance companies, but here's where the plot thickens. At the moment he sits down with the insurance company CEOs, he tells them something different. He says, listen, guys, I got a deal for you. I want more federal control over your industry. You're not going to like that, but I'm going to force millions of people who don't want insurance, who don't want to pay for it. I'm going to make them get it. And so that means millions of new customers for you, hundreds of millions of dollars of profits. And so you should support Obamacare because I'm essentially increasing your customer and profit base. And so Obamacare, presented as a scam between Obama and the American people against the insurance companies, is actually a scam between Obama and the insurance companies against the American people.
Well, again, that's part of the argument that you make in the book. There are just all sorts of scams. And since we're coming to a break, let me take one that I think we got about 3 minutes before a break here. One that's fairly easy to cover, and that is the reparations scam. People that have seen your movie know that the American Indians are saying, we need to be paid. Of course, those who were African American, we need to be paid. And so this scam of reparations is something that has been around for some time. You've tried to expose it, but again, you talk about it in your new book.
Yeah, I call it history for profit. It's a way of trying to tell a story about American history that causes people to owe you money. And this history for profit scheme has got to be likened to schemes that gangs use on the street. Remember, if a gang wants to rob an old lady, they have to first get in through the door. They have to get her to lift the chain off her apartment. Then they can kick in the door, go in and take her TV and take her furniture. Now, to do that, they have to sweet talk her at the beginning. And that's the ruse. I call it the pitch. And so progressives have a lot of pitches: the reparations pitch, the social justice pitch, Obama's "you didn't build that" pitch. And all of these are sort of ruses that are aimed at convincing people that they're not entitled to the stuff that they actually have, so that the progressives have a license to now come and take it. Reparations is just one of those scams, and it's based upon a distorted reading of history.
We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to spend some time continuing talking about that. Of course, that sort of leads into one of the other scams, and that, of course, is the greed and inequality scam. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Society Did It scam, the Lucky Luciano scam, and just a few, but also maybe just a little bit of a refresher course on Saul Alinsky, who not only was influential in the life of President Barack Obama, certainly as a community organizer, but as you may or may not know, had connections, of course, with Hillary Clinton. So you will see, not only will we be dealing with Saul Alinsky in this regime, but if indeed Hillary Clinton becomes the next president, we'll be dealing with it in the next regime. So if you would like to join the conversation today, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, as we talk with Dinesh D'Souza today about his book, Stealing America, What My Experience with Criminal Gangs Taught Me About Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. And if you're not familiar with Dinesh D'Souza, I would encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net, and we have a link to his website, DineshD'Souza.com. You can find out more about his book, as well as previous books about some of the movies, how you can connect up with him and get some of the latest information about what he has been speaking on. And, of course, we have the information about the book there as well. All available at the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you'll also find that we have posted a couple of informational items for you. One is my Viewpoints commentary. We have a Take Action section for you to respond to, as well as a video that you might want to watch. And we encourage you oftentimes when we post these videos to watch it. Click the share button, put it on your Facebook page, send it to someone else that might benefit from this. And if you would like to listen to this broadcast again or send it to someone else, you can also use that as an opportunity to click on that and share that with individuals so that they might be able to hear this interview, know a little bit more about this, or, of course, listen to it again. So if you would like to join the conversation, we'll give you a chance to join that. 1-800-351-1212. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of those scams that are used. They're used not only out on the street level, they're also used by individuals trying to get more money and get your money and to have more influence. And that's one of the things that Dinesh D'Souza talks about in his book, Stealing America. We'll have more right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Dinesh D'Souza with us. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The new book is entitled Stealing America, What My Experience with Criminal Gangs Taught Me About Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. Just before we take some phone calls, let's come back to some of the scams. We mentioned the reparations scam, and we sort of got into the greed and inequality scam. That seems to be the one working right now. If you watch, for example, any of the Democratic debates, and I have, and I don't recommend it for everybody, but they go long and sometimes issue of wealth inequality. Now, whatever you think about the inequality of wealth, and there may be some very good reasons for it, you argue that this is used as well as a scam to justify more government of politicians. How so?
Well, look at the way, for example, over the last 8 years in which we have seen a massive increase of government power and control over the private sector. So I'm not talking about progressive influence in government. I'm talking about the way in which progressives now have leverage over the banking industry, in the investment houses, the automobile companies, every doctor, every hospital, the healthcare industry, increasingly now the energy industry, and with this free college stuff, an attempt to move into the education. Now, these are large sectors of the private workplace. They generally are outside the sphere of the government. There's been limited regulation and control. So this empire of control has been greatly extended, giving someone like Obama enormous power. He can fire the CEO of General Motors, for example, which is something that no president previously had the power to do. So how is this done? This is done by scaring the American people into thinking that business is the bad guy. They have the power over you. Well, what kind of power does, let's say, a Steve Jobs or the head of Federal Express have over you or me? Very little. They have to convince us to use their products. They've got to sell us on it. We've got to get in our car and go down there to the Apple store and buy the stuff. By contrast, the parking meter maid or the guy at the DMV or the guy at the immigration office, these government officials have enormous power over you. I went before an immigration official who had to stamp accept or reject, and my whole life and its future would be determined by that stamp, and it was completely up to that guy's discretion. So the point I'm trying to make is that progressives, who are themselves the greediest, most selfish, and most powerful people, are trying to use the bogeyman of big business to scare people when they are actually what we should be scared of.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls along the way. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In Louisiana, KBAE. Ricky, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirby. And Mr. Dinesh, I really appreciate you having a backbone in an age where people, falling like flies. I mean, you've got to be public enemy number one in the side of Obama and his whole administration because of all the corruptness you expose. I mean, look, put it this way, he paid a corrupt judge to try to nail you and put you in prison, so I hope every Christian in Kirby's audience prays for you on a daily basis for your safety and well-being. But what I wanted to mention was that the Democratic Party, for years, you've always heard, we for the poor man, we're for the working man. Well, if that's the case, how come the majority of the senators and congressmen, percentage-wise, most of the Democrats are multimillionaires, not the Republicans. There's more multimillionaires in the Democratic Party than all of the Republicans combined. And how do they get their money? They don't rip off rich people. They rip off the poor man, the working man. That's who has the most votes. So they go, we on your side, all the while ripping them off. What proves that? I wish I had enough money to every Democratic household in the United States, and I'll promise you, win the election hands down. Of course, not every, even if they know the truth, but look at Hillary. Her highest poll figures was after she was found out lying about Benghazi. The Democrat is like the more wicked, evil you are, the more they like you, the more they want to vote for you.
Let me give Dinesh a chance to respond. Dinesh, any comments?
Well, look, by itself, I don't have a problem with people becoming millionaires or multimillionaires as long as they're able to produce products that people want to buy. And so this is part of what America means. We have a free market system in which you serve the customer. Now, the point I think the caller's trying to make is that the Democratic politicians didn't get rich that way. Harry Reid didn't have a lot of money when he went into politics, but because he's in Las Vegas, he's figured out a way to leverage his influence to accumulate a great deal of wealth. Part of the amazingness of the Clintons isn't just that we've had corruption at the local level, Tammany Hall in New York in the 19th century, the Daily Racket in Chicago in the middle of the 20th century, but we've never before had a Secretary of State who has figured out a way to make money off of minerals in Africa and uranium in Kazakhstan. And I think most scandalous of all, make money in Haiti. Now, you think there's no money in Haiti. Where are you going to make money in Haiti? Well, there's aid money, about $10 billion of aid. A good bit of it, by the way, flowing from the U.S. government. So here's Hillary. She's Secretary of State. And here's Bill. He's the UN representative for administering the aid in Haiti. This is like putting Bonnie and Clyde in charge of this sort of relief operation. All the money's flowing through the Clintons. Needless to say, a great deal gets mopped up along the way. That's why you have protesters outside the Clinton Foundation and Hillary's office saying, where did those billions go? The roads are still ramshackle. We've still got cholera. We haven't rebuilt Haiti. We had the money to do it, but somehow the money ended up in your pockets, and we're still standing in line.
There you go. Let's take another phone call. We'll go to Missouri, KCMH. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I love Dinesh D'Souza. I'm so glad you have him on here today. I have some family members who love Bernie Sanders. I had said to one of them, just what we need is another Chicago community organizer. And they said, he's not from Chicago, but I know he was there. What kind of information do you have on him, and is he in with all of this mess too?
Well, my view of Bernie Sanders is that, Bernie Sanders is a very, very silly man. He thinks that you can give everyone in the United States a free college education and get a handful of hedge fund investors in Wall Street to pay for all of it. Now, so he's got this kind of cartoon view of the world in which, by and large, everything should be free. Of course, if healthcare is free and education is free, I'm not sure why you can't walk into the grocery store and just take whatever you want. Why shouldn't food be free? Isn't food a right? So this is Bernie Sanders' whacked out view of the world. But I will say, I think a lot of the appeal of Bernie Sanders on the left is the fact that he's not Hillary. In other words, people feel that he may be dumb, but at least he's not wicked. He's not corrupt. He's not trying to make money off of politics in the way that the Clintons so cynically are. That's part of the appeal of Bernie Sanders.
I think so. Let's take another phone call real quickly, and then we'll take another break. We'll go to the state of Washington. JD, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Dinesh D'Souza.
Hey, how you doing, guys? And I turned you on because I was listening to music, and I liked your guys' talk there. And one of the things, when he brought up about the presidentials and stuff like that is that, it's like Hillary, when Hillary was rallying for Bill down in Arkansas, she was selling the wetlands that didn't have anything to do with anything she had to, but it was for the state. And then she had a bunch of people that were throwing in money. By the time the end was done, it was federally governed wetlands. They ended up going to court after Bill got into president. And then after that, I'd say probably, I believe it was a wetland something. I can't remember the name of it when they were taken to court. But there was about maybe 6 people that ended up mysteriously, one got shot, one ended up car crash.
Sure. Let me jump in real quickly before we take a break. But, that's part of it. Dinesh, there are a whole generation of young people that when you say Rose Law Firm, Whitewater, Vince Foster, they're going, huh? That's all ancient history, but it's all part of that previous corruption that's not necessarily in your book, but certainly well documented, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that the corruption that we saw in the Clinton administration, well, it started, as the caller says, this started way back in Arkansas when the Clintons would hand out packets of money to African-American leaders to rally the vote. This was a big racket they were running down there, but it was a small-time racket. It was a racket at the local level. I think even once they got to the White House, there's a big difference between Bill and Hillary. In my view, Hillary is much worse for this reason. Bill's desires are limited by his personal appetites. I mean, Bill wants to have the big office, and he wants to have people kowtow to him, and he wants to have all the women that he can handle. But once you satisfy his sort of personal circumference of needs, Bill is happy. Bill then wants to take a nap. Hillary, on the other hand, wants to run everything. She wants to run your life and my life. She'd like to tell the drillers in Midland, Texas, where they can drill and how much they can drill and what they should do with that oil. So in other words, Hillary has a totalitarian mindset, a kind of mindset that wants to sort of accumulate power, even power that has nothing really to do with her. It's a Napoleonic aspect of Hillary that Bill does not have, in my opinion.
Well, let's take a break. We'll come back with some more phone calls as we continue our discussion about the book Stealing America, what my experience with criminal gangs taught me about Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. We'll have more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes with Dinesh D'Souza as we talk about his book, Stealing America. And you know, in your chapter on silver spoons and genetic lotteries, or what you call the Lucky Luciano scam, it reminds me of course, Hillary Clinton. First of all, I gotta love a guy that can quote from John Rawls, Machiavelli, and Lucky Luciano all on the same page. That's pretty amazing. And just somebody that would know all of that is pretty amazing. Lucky Luciano, for people that are not familiar, was a Sicilian-born mobster who was just by the luck of the draw able to avoid being killed, assaulted, put away, and all of the rest. And you use that as a good example because Hillary Clinton really First became First Lady of Arkansas, then First Lady of the United States, then won an easy election as a U.S. Senator, lost to Barack Obama, Secretary of State. When you ask individuals, what has she accomplished, you kind of get this long pause because not much, but she has benefited from the luck of being associated with Bill Clinton, and now she may be our next president.
She has been actually very entrepreneurial about using her positions to benefit the Clintons, and she's done that from the beginning. For a while there, as Secretary of State, Hillary just kept, traveling all over the world, millions of miles, and people would say, to what end? I mean, what is she holding conferences? Is she signing treaties? Well, none of the above. In fact, apparently Obama didn't even give much authority to Hillary in the area of foreign policy. He wanted to run it himself. So what was Hillary doing? Well, I believe what Hillary was doing is prospecting. So Hillary would go down to Libya and say, okay, Gaddafi's out. There's a lot of chaos here, but Libya is also an oil-rich country, so there's money to be made. I mentioned earlier Haiti. The Clintons made trips to Kazakhstan, and you may think, why would they go to Kazakhstan? Tiny country, very little influence in the world. Well, Kazakhstan is a major source for producing uranium. The Clintons had billionaire friends in Canada who wanted those uranium deals. And so Hillary cleared the way through the State Department review process, because you can't just buy uranium on the open market. These guys then got rich. But what Hillary didn't count on was that the Russians were involved, and the Russians have essentially taken over a large part of the uranium industry. So this is a dangerous, dirty game. Not only are the Clintons in the middle of it, they're running it. And they're running it. It's one thing to be a criminal. I think the Lucky Luciano thing to me is funny because guys like Lucky Luciano or Luca Brasi in The Godfather, they're bad guys, but they don't pretend to be good guys. The difference with Hillary is that these are racketeers who wear the hat of social justice. They pretend they're doing it for the little guy. They're doing it because they love equality and so on. So somehow this love of equality keeps putting money in their pocket. So I think part of what this book does, in a way my earlier books haven't, is it blows the whistle on the racket that's going on in the name of virtue. And that's what makes the political criminals different from the guys that I hung out with in the confinement center.
Just a few of the scams in the book. You'll have to read it to find out a little bit more. But let's go to Illinois. George, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Dinesh D'Souza.
Hello. I have missed a little bit of your show here and there, so I'm not quite sure if the author has, Mr. D'Souza, has answered this question.
Sure.
But his book sounds very, very, very good and solid. And but I would like to know what he hopes to accomplish with the book, because the feeling that I have is overwhelmed and frustration. Like there's nothing we can, like the American people, there's nothing we can do. This is so big, and this is so powerful that we don't have any control at all. So what is he hoping to accomplish with his book?
Very good question. That's a good kind of way to end the program, because I'd like to maybe talk about, as you do give a little bit of suggestion about what can and can't be done, and you talk about cracking the con. So let's, if we can, for just a few minutes, see if we can answer George's question.
Okay, well, two things come to mind right away. The first is that the Republicans right now are in control of two branches of government, and they have a kind of a draw on the Supreme Court, an even balance of power. Now, that is a lot of control, because the Congress in our system, in our constitutional system, Congress makes the laws. The executive branch doesn't make laws. Congress makes laws. Second, Congress has the power of the purse. The entire federal budget is under the control of Congress if Congress will exercise that control. Now, I think that the Republicans are operating under this delusion that they need to have a veto-proof majority before they can do anything. So they are in a self-imposed coma. That's the first problem. The second problem is that this is a Democratic con. In other words, the Obama-Hillary types can't pull off the cons that they do without the collusion of at least substantial segments of the American people, powerful segments of the media and academia and so on. They need votes in order to pull off these scams. That's different than, let's say, the Bloods or the Crips on the south side of L.A. And so the American people have a lot of say about this, and they can actually stop it. So I think, in this age of social media, we are all very powerful information generators. And we all have networks that we can activate to stop these things. So I think that the ordinary American is much more powerful than he or she thinks in being able to take action if we will put in the effort and the time in order to stop the con.
If some of that information just goes out and becomes viral, just think about how we've seen remarkable changes just with social media. Of course, we always talk about the vote, and one of the things I hope we will encourage people that not only listen to this program, but people that you know that don't listen to this program that maybe aren't even registered to vote or were registered to vote that did not vote last time, because we identified at least 39 million born-again Christians that did not vote in the last presidential election, about 13 million that were not registered to vote, 26 million that were registered to vote that did not vote. That's certainly the long term, and less than a year from now, that vote will be cast, not only for who you're going to vote for president, but some of those members of Congress you were talking about too. But as you point out, in the meantime, there is social media, there is the information we've posted on the website, there, of course, is your book, the link to your website. There's a lot of material that you can put in the hands of individuals who then can multiply that many times over with their sphere of influence. So I think there's a very significant number of things we can do as we try to educate the American people.
The ordinary American, whether Republican or Democrat, doesn't want the United States to become like Mexico or like India and operate in the form of third world gangs that essentially turn the place into a lawless theft operation. We've been protected from that. We've been insulated from that. And that's why I'm an immigrant to America. My patriotism is based upon loving a country that's not just now my country, but it's a good country. And protecting its goodness, I think, is our challenge today. So we can do it. I think we just need to be more vigilant, and we need to use our influence. People don't realize that they typically use very little of the influence they actually have. The last chapter of my book, I show some ways that people can actually have a lot more influence than they actually do.
So again, it's just great material in the book, Stealing America, What My Experience with Criminal Gangs Taught Me About Obama, Hillary, and the Democratic Party. Dinesh D'Souza has been our guest. And Dinesh, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's my pleasure.
Again, his website is DineshD'Souza.com. We have a link there as well. We have information about him and his book, so feel free to visit our website, pointofview.net. The book just came out a couple of weeks ago, so you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. If not, of course, you can order it there, and I think you will find it very helpful. When we come back, we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking with Tony Meggs. He is the president and CEO of Christian Care Ministry, and from time to time, some of you have had questions about these health-sharing ministries, and as we have pointed out in the past, especially as you start looking at your insurance this year, some people have said, well, is there an alternative? And there actually is, that even in the Obamacare Act, Affordable Care Act, you have Section 1501 that allows for certain exemptions, and one of those are for a health-sharing ministry. And we've talked with some of those groups in the past. We wanted to bring him back on because some of you may be making decisions about health care, and so that is certainly one aspect. A little bit later, we're going to be talking with James Rosen, who's the Washington correspondent for Fox News, about his new book on Dick Cheney. So we have a lot more to cover. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we're talking about, visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
In 2008, we were told that change had come to America. We got change, all right. What do you think about the changes so far? If you're concerned about the direction of the nation, what are you doing? What are you doing to make a positive change? Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360. Give in December and each month of 2016 and help us change lives. Call 1-800-347-5151 or give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View Radio app. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Click on Become a Monthly Partner. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
One of the things we talk about so often here are the idea of some of these healthcare sharing ministries, and especially right now when some of you might be saying, well, I'm looking at my insurance bill and I'm wondering, is there an alternative? And we've talked on this program many times before, but let me mention it again for some of you newer listeners, that if you look at the Affordable Care Act, Section 1501, there are certain exemptions that are provided. And one of those exemptions, which we've talked about on this program before, are for Christians who might consider a health sharing ministry. There are a number of those we've talked about in the past, MediShare and Samaritan Ministries and some others, Christian healthcare ministries. And so we thought it would be good to revisit that topic in light of certainly a number of things that have happened and some other questions that many of you might have. So we bring now to the microphone the president and CEO of Christian Care Ministry, Tony Meggs. He's been on the program with us before, leads the organization whose mission is really to help Christians live a healthy biblical lifestyle. And it, of course, requires a little bit more than insurance, because it's not insurance, but it requires you to sign a statement of faith, a code of conduct, and a testimony. But it is an alternative that we wanted you to know about. And so we wanted to also give you a chance to hear from him. And if you have questions, we'll open up the phones at 1-800-351-1212. Tony, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you very much, Kirby. It's good to be back with you.
I think the last time I interviewed you, I even wrote those down. I think at that time you had about 24,000 households, about 65,000 believers that are part of Christian Care MediShare. But, of course, those numbers have increased dramatically, in large part because people that are Christians have said, maybe there's an alternative. Maybe I would rather my healthcare dollars go towards individuals that share my convictions, have the same kind of code of conduct, and those kinds of things. So talk about what's been happening since we interviewed you last.
Well, yeah, things certainly have changed. We're fortunate, been blessed with growth over the most recent years, and today we're approaching or a little over 58,000 households, well over 160,000 individuals that are just a part of the MediShare program. So it certainly is an exciting period for us. It's a test of faithfulness for ourselves to grow our program, to scale our program, to be able to meet the needs of Christian households across the country.
The biblical basis we've talked about before, we can certainly see that in the book of Acts. Acts 2 talks about take care of each other. We see about the opportunity for us to minister to one another. And I think that even long before we had Obamacare, of course, there were individuals, including myself, that were involved in this in one way or another. But it, I think, is based upon some basic biblical principles, isn't it?
It really is. We're called to live in community, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and there's really not a better application than to share our money with each other, to share our funds with each other, to make certain that a fellow believer in Christ that they. Should they have a catastrophic medical event, that they don't have to fear bankruptcy, that they don't have to fear going through that challenging period by themselves. And if you take the concept of healthcare sharing, it's been around since the beginning of the early church. Just it's just more formalized today. We have the convenience of technology to make it more convenient to be to make it more convenient to participate in the process. But the idea of the church simply sharing their lives, their talents, their faith, and their resources with each other isn't anything new. It really does go back to the early church in the book of Acts.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, I have lots of questions still for Tony Meggs, but I also want to give you a chance to ask some because you might say, I'd like to know a little bit more, and so you have a chance to talk with the president and CEO of Christian Care Ministry. Tony, let's talk about some of the basics. Obviously, people send money in, and then that goes to individuals that have particular needs, and you are the conduit for that. But in order to join, I mentioned just in passing, but let's go into that in a little more detail. A statement of faith, a code of conduct, a testimony. What would that require of our listeners if some of them said, well, maybe this is something I'd like to pursue?
Right. It's a really good place to start off because, the concept of healthcare sharing isn't for everyone. It's really the program is designed for those like-minded individuals that first share, a common faith around the death, resurrection, the deity of Jesus Christ, and all that is weaved into our statement of faith. It's nothing strange. It's a straight line Protestant statement of faith that members across multiple denominations are comfortable with. But the second point you mentioned is this kind of code of conduct where, we recognize that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and we're called to live holy and set apart. And so there is an expectation, really, how we treat our bodies. We have to make certain that we don't abuse alcohol, that we don't abuse prescription drugs or take illegal drugs. Sexual relations are confined to the marriage, and those are the code of conduct that we all require each other to live by, who want to participate in this program. And then we ask each prospective members simply to share it with us. What is their testimony and their faith in Christ, to help us see and know that we are like-minded in that acceptance of Christ as Lord and Savior of their lives.
So again, those are a couple of issues. One that I want to talk to you about after the break is when we had Dr. Merrill Matthews in here. He wrote an article in Forbes because I know some people have said, well, if I drop traditional health insurance, what if my medical expenses get too high? Mm-hmm. And of course, I've had individuals, for example, with Samaritan Ministries say, well, we've covered every dime. I suspect you have as well. But some have said, well, maybe there's a way they could get something else, like a life insurance policy that would pay for some out-of-pocket expense if indeed those expenses were too high. So I want to come back and talk about that because that's another question people have. Mm-hmm. Okay, this works real well if I'm healthy, and we're pretty healthy now, and we have a biblical lifestyle and all the rest, but what about those issues? And of course, one of the other questions that many of you have is, and I think one of the reasons that many people have decided to join one of these health sharing ministries is your dollars are not going towards abortion, abortifacients, all sorts of other issues that we've talked about here at Point of View. And so that's certainly another issue as well. But when we come back, I'm going to take some phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, we already have a call coming in. We'll get a couple more in just a minute. So if you'd like to ask a question, Tony Meggs will be with us a little bit longer. Then later we're going to have James Rosen. He is the White House correspondent with Fox News. So we'll change topics. So for the next few minutes, we'll still stay on this topic and give you a chance to ask a question. Then we're going to move on because there are so many other things to talk about today. But certainly we wanted to give you that opportunity. So if you'd like to call right now, 1-800-351-1212. We'll give him a chance to respond to a few of these questions and then answer some of yours. And if you've always thought about this and wanted to maybe get some more information, that's why we're providing this forum. So we'll provide it in detail right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, I know that many Americans suffer from addictions, but I've never really run the numbers, and so was shocked when I read the book by David Kupelian, The Snapping of the American Mind. In the midst of his discussion of social problems in America are some sobering chapters about our addictions. Nearly 25 million Americans are currently illicit drug users. Marijuana is the most commonly used drug, but cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other drugs are also part of that statistic. Add to that alcohol consumption and the estimate that nearly 1/4 of all Americans participated in binge drinking. And according to the Department of Health and Human Services, in an average year, 30 million Americans drive drunk and 10 million drive impaired by illicit drugs. That means that well over 80 million Americans are intoxicated in one way or another with illegal drugs or alcohol, and 40 million of them have been at one time or another driving under the influence. But there's a parallel drug problem. This is the rapidly increasing number of people taking medically prescribed but poorly understood and mind-altering psychiatric drugs. These include such things as opiate analgesics to suppress pain, as well as various mood-altering drugs. David Kupelian says when you add all these numbers, you can easily estimate that at least 130 million Americans are taking some drug, legal, illegal, alcohol. In a nation of 320 million, 130 million using some sort of drug is astonishing. Then he begins to document all sorts of other addictions, like addictions to sex, pornography, gambling, and even our digital devices. It doesn't take long before you realize that we are a nation of addicts. We have an addiction problem that pastors and churches need to confront. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Covering a lot of topics today, and the one we're focusing on right now is, of course, on these Christian care ministries, these health-sharing ministries. In particular, we're talking with Tony Meggs, President and CEO of Christian Care Ministry. Might just mention that my commentary on November 6th, which you can find on our website, talks about these health-sharing ministries, also talks about Dr. Merrill Matthews, who wrote a piece in Forbes about some that might say, well, what about a really catastrophic kind of illness or accident, and suggested some ideas there, although I have been assured by many of these various ministries, whether it's Metashare or Samaritan's Ministry, that they've always been able to cover 100%, but that's something else you can read about. And interestingly enough, my commentary today is all about the number of people that are addicted to something. When you talk about 130,000 people addicted to something, Tony, that's maybe why some Christians may want to pool together and be in a pool with people that aren't dealing with drugs, illegal, legal, or alcohol, and are actually being responsible. So that's, I think, another powerful argument for Christian Care Ministry. But what about this concern that sometimes people have in the back of their mind that, okay, I'd love to join with you, but what if I'm in a major accident or I come down with cancer? Can that be covered?
Well, yeah, it's certainly an interesting point that you're making, and organizations like the Metashare program, like Samaritan Ministries, we have just a really strong history of sharing in all the medical needs of their membership. Our program, the way our program is designed, we don't have any caps on what is eligible for sharing in a year or even over a lifetime. In a population of 160,000 members, we have some high dollar medical events. I think last year alone we had over 150 that went over the $100,000 mark, and we get some that go up to the $1 million mark when you think about a liver transplant and those types of things.
Yes.
And we share in those, and for 22 years, what people have to remember that this isn't insurance. We just have created a way, for Christians to share their money with each other should someone have a need. But since 1993, for 22 years now, our members have faithfully shared in all of the medical bills that's ever been published to them for sharing.
They're very good.
So Healthcare Sharing Ministries have a great track record when it comes to their consistency and their performance.
Got a full bank of phone calls, so I'll give each one of you a chance to ask a question. And we'll first go to Grace in WAGP in Georgia. Thank you for joining us today. You're on with Tony Meggs.
Hello. I am very interested in learning about your Medicare program. Can you tell me, I'm over 65 and I'm in very good health, and my insurance company is simply going out of business as of this month, December, and I have to find other insurance. Can you tell me, do you insure people who are over 65?
Well, we again, the thing I would want to be really clear on is that this is an insurance. It's a medical sharing program. But we certainly have members that are a part of our membership that are over 65. A sharing program like Medishare is going to be secondary to an insurance program like Medicare. Being over 65 years old, you're most likely eligible for Medicare, having worked most of your life. And so, but Medicare doesn't pay for everything. It pays about 80% of a medical need. Well, there's the other 20% that you would have to pay for, and that can often get very expensive as you age. Where our members share in those expenses. If you're over 65, anything that your Medicare doesn't pay for, is per the guidelines would be eligible for sharing, and our members share in those expenses.
Let's go to Maine. Liz, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Tony Meggs.
Hi, Tony. I'm interested in the Medishare program, having just lost my job recently and not wanting to get involved with the affordable health care program for all of the obvious reasons and things that you have to pay for that are anti-biblical. Mm-hmm. And what I was wondering is, with previous insurances, we're allowed to use an HSA account and contribute money to that. And if you're over 50, you can contribute, I think, up to $4,000 a year into that for out-of-pocket expenses. And is that something that can still be utilized with the Medishare?
That's a great question. And actually today, Healthcare Sharing Ministries, they aren't eligible for health savings accounts because they're not insurance. We certainly have been working with the legislators in Washington to make, because of the strong history of Healthcare Sharing Ministries, to make Healthcare Sharing Ministries eligible for, being able to set up an HSA account and work in concert with your HSA account. But today, that's really not available. But certainly a lot of our members, as a part of participating in their program, we've created a unique construct where you can pick what we call different AHP levels, your annual household portion. And certainly many of our members will pick a larger annual household portion, and they will create a savings account to save up for those out-of-pocket expenses, and then expenses related to just routine tests that are not going to be eligible for sharing.
Okay. Let me take at least one more phone call before we run out of time here. We'll go to Oklahoma this time. Scott, you're on with Tony Meggs.
Hey, Scott.
Scott, you there? Well, we'll get Scott in just a minute. I think he wanted to talk about how you would pay a physician in terms of copay and full pay. What does that look like? I think, again, that might be helpful for individuals. They say, okay, I've got a Medishare card and I go to my physician. What does that look like when I do my payments, and how do I get reimbursed? Talk about that.
Sure. We've put an emphasis on, trying to be, convenient for the members to participate in the process. And you're simply going to go to the doctor, go to the hospital. You will present your Medishare card. We have over 500,000 doctors, hospitals, medical service providers that are in our network. We use a network, a PPO network. It's the nation's largest, to get better pricing on the medical bills, to keep our share rates more affordable for our members. So you simply, you go to the doctor, present your card. The doctor sends us the medical bills. We will process the medical bills, make sure they're eligible for sharing, and then we facilitate the process of moving money from my account into Kirby's account to make sure his medical bill gets paid if he's got a medical need this month. And the process works seamless. We use technologies, we use bank accounts to make it just work seamless for the member and make it very easy for them to participate in.
Let's see if we can do two things. Number one, I just noticed the questions that Grace and Liz were asking probably need some follow-up and talking with somebody in a specific way, but I think they illustrate why people might be paying attention to it right now. This is a chance for individuals, if they've seen their premiums go really high, or if the insurance company doesn't even exist now or is going to go out of business or not going to participate with Obamacare. That's one of my commentaries this week, by the way. Or maybe they've lost a job or they want to no longer have their financial resources used to actually aid individuals in unbiblical lifestyles. There are some very good reasons for that. So talk about how our listeners, if they are interested, can contact you, especially if they have additional questions.
Sure. There's really, first of all, if they're listening today and they're in the car, they can always call 1-800-SOM-23. Again, that's 1-800-SOM-23. And can speak with one of our representatives. Or at your convenience, always just go to our website. Our website is mychristiancare.org. Again, that's mychristiancare.org. And there you'll be introduced to how the program works. You can pick a program that's kind of convenient to your own budget, your own family structure, and learn really just how the program has benefited Christians across the country since 1993.
Well, Tony, appreciate you being on. We do it from time to time, and I certainly thought that as many people were starting to know that they were going to be paying a lot more in their insurance, or maybe concerned about whether their money goes to groups like Planned Parenthood or whatever, or of course even some that no longer have an insurance company that just simply went out of business because of some of those regulations. I hope that they will check this out, and I appreciate you coming on from time to time to answer some of those questions. So let's do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll spend some time talking briefly with James Rosen. He only has a little bit of time with us, but he is the Washington correspondent for Fox News. Had a great interview a while back with Dick Cheney, former vice president. We'll learn a little bit more about what he feels were his successes, maybe some of his regrets, and then we'll move on to some of the issues in the news today. Lots still to cover. All that coming up right after these messages.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We hopefully will connect up with James Rosen in just a minute, and an individual that, of course, has been the White House correspondent, Washington correspondent for many years with Fox News, and his new book, Cheney One. So we're going to spend some time talking with him, but also wanted to get into a couple of other issues in the news today. One, of course, is the shooting in Colorado at Planned Parenthood, as well as the climate change conference. So those were also issues we'll cover a little bit later, but we're privileged to have with us now James Rosen, who serves as the chief White House and Washington correspondent for Fox News. I should say Washington correspondent for Fox News. And, of course, during the Bush-Cheney era, he covered the White House and the State Department and actually had a chance to travel both with the president and the vice president. James Rosen, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, great to be with you, with the proviso that I am joining you from a moving Amtrak train, so to the extent you hear some noise in the back, that's what.
And if it does, and if I lose you, we understand that. I do live radio every day, so I can understand that. But I was struck by the fact that Dick Cheney has certainly had a background that I did not really understand until your book, because I'm older and I remember him in the Ford administration, certainly in the Bush administration, the rest, but did not realize that he really blew an opportunity at Yale. As a matter of fact, at one point he said, Yale, I look back and say I blew that opportunity, great education. But he says, well, it worked out. It turned out for me that there were things I got out of going to Wyoming that I never would have gotten out of Yale, which I had to pay for. And I worked hard for it, and at the same time did it in order to get top-notch grades. So I did not know that could have been one of his significant regrets, that it happened even before most of us saw him in public life.
True enough. And first of all, thank you for having me, Kirby. In this book, Cheney One, I interviewed former Vice President Cheney for 10 hours this past December, almost exactly a year ago.
Yes.
In his own home, in his study in Northern Virginia, shortly before he was to turn 74. And I can promise you and our listeners, you have never heard Dick Cheney open up the way he does in these interviews and in this book, Cheney One. And the episode that you just described, where Dick Cheney had a scholarship to Yale and flunked out, and along the way racked up 2 DUIs, was one of the areas where he was really forthcoming and really candid about it. You know, Dick Cheney is a Westerner. He grew up in Nebraska and Wyoming.
Yes.
At the time he got this scholarship to Yale, he had never been east of Evanston, Illinois, or Chicago. And so when he got to Yale in the late 1950s, he just felt out of his element, and he wasn't used to seeing a situation where there wasn't big sky over him, and he didn't mix well with the people. And he told me a story in the interviews about how he and all of his buddies lived in a common sort of dorm-like setting where all the bedroom doors opened up onto a common area, but they turned the fourth bedroom into a bar, and he was drinking too much beer. And those DUIs found Dick Cheney, age 19, waking up overnight in a jail in Wyoming, and he told me that was the wake-up call. Many years later, he was asked, how did you clean up your act? He said, it was easy. I got married and quit hanging out in bars. But, here's a guy who, by the time he was 34 years old, having had that kind of experience at the age of 19, 20, by the time he was 34, was Chief of Staff in the White House to President Gerald Ford.
Just amazing. Again, this book is entitled Cheney One, a Candid Conversation with America's Most Controversial Statesman. You can find it in your local bookstore, but we have links certainly to James Rosen, to Regnery Publishing, in case you'd like to order it online, and all sorts of great resources. Before we get into some of your comments about terrorism and everything else, I would think we might at least talk about his one regret. It's amazing that how, whether it's George W. Bush or Dick Cheney, they have no regrets, and it's kind of interesting. But his one regret, in sort of in quotes, is he wishes he'd studied history instead of political science. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, these interviews, as I mentioned, took place in the former vice president's study, and there were about 350, 400 books lining the walls, as well as a few framed swords that had been presented to him over the years.
Yes.
And to turn your head clockwise and look at all these books, all of them neatly aligned at shelf's edge, was to marvel at this extraordinary library of military, political, and diplomatic history. And he's read these books. and he would talk to me about these books that showed that he had read them. And they were arranged chronologically such that the World War II books gave way slowly to the Eisenhower books, which yielded to the Kennedy books, to the Johnson and Nixon books, and so forth. And he told me that he wished that once he went back and paid his own way, $96 a semester at the University of Wyoming, which he paid for, by the way, by being a lineman for the county and building power line out there, he started to get straight A's. But he studied political science, and he told me that he wished he had studied history because, as he told me, the art of government is really applying lessons from previous case studies of history to contemporary problems. That's how we govern ourselves, he told me. And so where everything else is concerned, Iraq, 9/11, Guantanamo, interrogations, wiretaps, campaigns and elections, all of those sort of things, he had no regrets, which isn't to say he didn't acknowledge mistakes. He did acknowledge mistakes, very specific ones. But his regret was about not studying history.
One of the things I thought was so interesting in your book was you asked him about the two Bushes. Of course, we could talk about Ford, but we'll leave that off because I'm an old guy and I remember him, but most of our listeners don't. But George Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush. He had a chance to see both father and son, both in the presidency, and it was interesting to see some of his comments about the difference in personality and the difference in how they approached, in a sense, the war on terrorism.
Well, first of all, Kirby, you sound very young and vibrant to me.
I'm in my 60s, so I'm an old guy now.
Then you have a gift, one of many. But yes, I did ask Dick Cheney in these interviews, in Cheney One-on-One, what were the great differences that you observed in the two Presidents Bush as men, as leaders, as people to work for? And he said that Bush 43 was a lot more like his mother, Barbara Bush, than he was like his dad, because Bush 43 had a kind of a tart tongue and spoke his mind. And then he talked about the different portfolios of experiences that each George Bush brought to the Oval Office. George H.W. Bush, having been a naval aviator in World War II, director of CIA, ambassador to China, had an extraordinary set of foreign policy experiences, whereas his son was more successful in electoral politics, a two-term governor of Texas, and of course, ultimately a two-term president. But he really had next to no travels outside the country and no foreign policy experience, and that was central to why he wanted Dick Cheney on that ticket. People think that because Dick Cheney led the search for George W. Bush's vice presidential running mate, and that he wound up as the running mate, it must have resulted from some kind of Machiavellian maneuvers by Dick Cheney. In fact, as he tells me in Cheney One-on-One, he turned down George W. Bush twice and only acceded on the third request, because George W. Bush knew that he, as a governor of Texas without much foreign policy national...
Yes, we did lose him. Well, we gave it a try here. We knew he was on an Amtrak train, so I guess that's the lost James Rosen. We'll see if we can get him back, but I don't think it's going to work out. But just wanted you to know a little bit more about this book. Again, Cheney One-on-One. We'll see if we can catch him, and if not, again, he warned us that he was on an Amtrak train, and so I don't know that we're going to catch him again. We'll give it a try, but again, the book is entitled Cheney One-on-One, and we're hoping maybe in the future that we'll be able to get Dick Cheney or at least Liz Cheney on, because Dick and Liz Cheney have written this book called Exceptional, Why the World Needs a Powerful America. But I thought it was interesting that one of the questions James Rosen asked is, did you find one easier to work with than the other? And he said, well, there are some differences. I always thought the national security team we had under 41, which would be the first President Bush, was especially effective with Baker and this, of course, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, as well as the president, obviously myself. It was a group that worked together very well. It wasn't as smooth an operation under George W. Bush or 43, but again, my perspective on it was different because in one case I'm the Secretary of Defense, on the other I'm the Vice President. But he did notice some differences between Bush 41 and Bush 43, certainly differences in how they approached the war on terror. So I thought, if nothing else, you might like that insight. So again, no issue at all, but again, we thought it would be fun for you to hear a little bit of the interview with James Rosen. Unfortunately, he was as he warned us on an Amtrak train, and so we lost that cell phone coverage. So when we come back from the break, we're going to give you a chance to join the conversation. We've already talked about the issue of Obamacare and Medishare. We've talked with Dinesh D'Souza about some of those issues related to certainly Hillary Clinton. And when we come back, I'll take some of those phone calls and then also get into the shooting at the Planned Parenthood Clinic in Colorado, as well as the beginning of the climate change conference. And if we don't have a chance to cover all of that, well, there's always more tomorrow. So if you'd like to join the conversation this last few minutes, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. And we'll give you that chance to express your opinion. And of course, tomorrow we'll be getting into many other issues that I think will be of interest to you as we'll certainly work our way through the week. And each day we'll try to leave a little bit of time to talk about what's in the news, but also give you a couple of interviews that you would love to hear about some books that are out that would make a great read. So let's take a break, come back, take some phone calls, and get back into the news cycle. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Missouri first and talk to Mike. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. So, yeah, I've got a big question. You know, I turned the big 6-0, and well, actually, I went back to it, but I am a teacher and coach, and I don't have insurance. And actually, even when I did, I never had to go to the doctor. You know, God bless me really good, but for the last 30 years.
Sure.
So, and anyway, for somebody to tell me that I have to have insurance, and which I don't, and some people told me that they've had to, they pay more for not having insurance, you know, for political reasons than they would have ever paid.
Right.
Under the Obamacare.
Oh yeah, and that's it. That's intentional because it's we're going to force everybody into the pool.
Well, I guess I'm in my brain. I guess I'm a little bit more of a teenager. You know, you always got to give them choices. You know, and okay, you do this or you don't do this. This is your choice, and give them a choice. I don't really feel like the American people have been given a choice.
No,
you
well, they weren't.
do it or no.
Again, it was passed by a legislative sleight of hand. I mean, a lot of people say, how did this happen? Well, it couldn't happen today, and it only happened there by actually taking one piece of legislation that had passed the Senate, stripping out all the language and putting it in so that they could pass it. I mean, because there was and anybody not familiar with that can look it up, but it was obviously what you might call a legislative sleight of hand. And the people were sold, as you were hearing earlier from Dinesh D'Souza, a bill of goods. You're going to be able to keep your doctor, you'll be able to keep your health plan. This is going to be a way to get more people that are uninsured into the system. And of course, there are people like yourself. I may not agree with your decision not to be insured, but I think you have the wisdom or the right, at least, I should say, to say, well, I'm a pretty healthy individual, and it's sort of a calculus, and whether or not I'm going to have insurance or not, it should be my decision. And then you had the Supreme Court going along with that, and it looked like at one point that it was going to actually be struck down, but then John Roberts changed his mind, and so here we are. Now, many years later, individuals saying, as we heard from Liz and Grace and others, you know, either I lost my job, which may have been because of Obamacare, certainly lost my insurance company. I'm sure that's because of Obamacare. And still, the American people just keep going along with all of that. And I'm hoping this next election might be an opportunity to win.
How should I proceed? I'm not an unreasonable person, but at this point in time, you know, I really can't afford what they're wanting me to pay.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to make that decision on your own. Again, like one of the reasons I brought up Tony Meggs and just some of these health sharing ministries is to give people another option. I would have to say that it is less expensive to go into one of those plans. Now, it's not insurance, as they have pointed out many times before, but it is something that might be one option. The other is that you're going to have, again, a gun pointed at your head, figuratively, of course, by the government saying you either go into one of the Obamacare plans or you will pay more in fines than you would have if you went into one of these insurance plans. And that was entirely the case to try to force everybody into the pool. I think the long-range goal is to move to a single-payer plan. If we elect Bernie Sanders as the next president, which I sincerely doubt, but if we were, that's exactly what he wants, a single-payer plan, where basically we have, in a sense, Medicare for everyone, or Medicaid for everyone, however you want to look at it. And so we'll see how that plays itself out, but those are some decisions you will have to make, and I'll leave those to you. Just before I run out of time, let me mention that tomorrow we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, Jeremiah Johnston will be with us in the first hour. We're going to talk about some of these theological issues. I think you'll appreciate that. But then we're going to get back into this whole issue of the pro-life movement. Number one, we're going to have an interview where we're going to talk about how one of these Planned Parenthood clinics that closed down, they turned it into a pregnancy resource center. I think that'd be a real encouragement for you. And of course, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about the shooting that took place in Colorado. And as Nate Jackson said on one of his commentaries, he said an Iraq war veteran, a woman, a police officer were murdered Friday by a psychopath. Each victim leaves behind 2 children. Yet because those murders took place not in the streets of Chicago, but a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs, the left immediately began attacking pro-lifers and pushing its anti-gun message. Even President Barack Obama weighed in although he ignores most of the murders that took place in Democratic areas like Chicago. The deranged killer reportedly said something about no more baby parts, a reference perhaps to the string of videos that were revealing what Planned Parenthood was doing. The nation's largest abortion mill and the left media called these videos discredited, but that's wishful thinking. None of the victims was a Planned Parenthood worker, and in fact, the officer was a Christian and an outspoken pro-life advocate who nevertheless died defending abortionists. I love the little graphic that went with this, All Lives Matter, because it had a picture of the Iraqi war veteran, had a picture of the woman, had a picture of the police officer, and a picture of what? An unborn baby. Because as he points out a little bit later in the piece, according to the National Abortion Federation, 11 people have died in anti-abortion violence since 1977. But since 1973, Roe v. Wade decision, nearly 58 million children have lost their lives. And so we will spend some time tomorrow, obviously, talking about this issue. And, of course, if you are pro-life, you are against the violence that was done at this clinic. And at the same time, it's doubtful how much pro-life this individual was. You can find out a little bit more about him tomorrow, but you can read some of the blogs to recognize that he hardly fits the stereotype. Individual that, by the way, was not a Republican, sometimes identified himself as a woman, all sorts of other bizarre things. Obviously a terribly deranged individual. And if this, of course, happened in the streets of one of the major cities, might not even get press coverage. But because it happened at a Planned Parenthood clinic, of course, we're going to be hearing the backlash to that for many, many days. Let me also mention, of course, the Climate Change Conference has actually begun in Paris, and my commentary tomorrow really helps us begin to understand the kind of cost that these leaders actually believe that we should pay in order to deal with this issue of climate change. So as we begin to see some of the proposals being put forward, we're going to try to put some numbers to it and also give you some implications to it. But I think the simplest thing we can look at is even if there's an agreement that comes out of this Paris Climate Change Conference, you have to believe that probably only one nation is really going to even try to meet those guidelines, and that's the United States, which, by the way, has, just by some of the changes in our technology, met some of the original targets from the Kyoto Treaty. But you know that other countries are not. I mean, does anybody really think that Vladimir Putin is going to try to meet these guidelines and these targets? Really? Do you think China is going to, when there are still lots of people living in poverty? Are you thinking that India will, when this is a great opportunity for them to come out of a culture of poverty into the 21st century? So again, there will be a lot of screaming and yelling, a lot of claims being made, but we'll try to follow that throughout the week. And I hope you will take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net, in case you'd like to find some of the material that we've covered today. We had a chance to hear from Dinesh D'Souza, Tony Meggs, as well as James Rosen. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to listen to the broadcast again, you can download that podcast or send it on to other individuals. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Join us tomorrow as we talk about everything from the pro-life movement to theology. We'll see you then.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.